In the middle of the night, explosions lit up one of the most important islands in the Middle East. US strike aircraft had just hit Kharg Island, the single location responsible for most of Iran's oil exports. Within minutes, reports began spreading that American forces had targeted military installations across the island, marking one of the most serious escalations of the war so far. Kharg Island sits in the northern Persian Gulf, roughly 25 kilometers off Iran's coastline. At first glance, it looks like a small piece of land in a vast sea, but strategically, it is one of the most critical energy hubs on the planet. Nearly all of Iran's exported crude oil flows through this island before being loaded onto massive tankers and sent toward global markets. That is exactly why the strike has drawn so much attention. Analysts have long described Kharg Island as Iran's economic lifeline. Without it, the country would struggle to sell its oil abroad, cutting off one of the main sources of revenue that keeps its economy running. For years, the island has been heavily fortified with military defences designed to protect this vital infrastructure from air or naval attack. But now, those defences are being tested like never before. The latest wave of American strikes targeted military positions on the island as part of the broader campaign that has already hit thousands of Iranian sites in recent weeks. Satellite images and initial reports indicate that several facilities connected to Iran's military presence on Kharg Island were damaged or destroyed during the operation. What makes this strike particularly significant is not just the location, but the message behind it. By hitting targets on Kharg Island, the United States demonstrated that it can reach one of Iran's most sensitive economic centers whenever it chooses. At the same time, the attack stopped short of destroying the oil export terminals themselves, suggesting that the strike may have been intended as a warning rather than a full economic knockout blow. And that raises an important question. If Kharg Island is responsible for the vast majority of Iran's oil exports, why would the United States strike the island but avoid destroying the very infrastructure that keeps Iran's oil flowing? To understand that, we first need to look at why this small island in the Persian Gulf has become one of the most strategically important pieces of land in the entire conflict. To understand why this strike is such a big deal, you have to understand what Kharg Island actually does for Iran. This place is basically the exit door for Iran's oil. Almost everything the country sells to the outside world leaves from here. Huge pipelines run from Iran's largest oil fields across the mainland and end right here on this island. Oil from places like Avaz, Marun and Gaksaran gets pumped toward Kharg, stored in massive tank farms, and then loaded onto giant tanker ships waiting in the Persian Gulf. From there, those tankers head out through the Strait of Hormuz and into global markets. That route is one of the most important energy corridors on Earth. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through that narrow waterway, and Kharg Island is one of the main points feeding that supply. The scale of the infrastructure on the island is enormous. Kharg has storage facilities that can hold tens of millions of barrels of crude oil at a time. Giant loading terminals stretch into the water so multiple supertankers can dock and fill up simultaneously. When everything is running normally, millions of barrels of Iranian oil move through this island every single day. For Iran's economy, that flow is critical. Oil exports bring in the majority of the country's foreign revenue. Without that money, funding the military, running the government, and supporting the broader economy becomes dramatically harder. Because of that, Iran has spent decades fortifying Kharg Island. Radar systems, air defense batteries, coastal defenses, and military personnel have all been positioned there specifically to protect the oil infrastructure. In past conflicts, the island has even been repaired and rebuilt after attacks, because losing it would be catastrophic. And that leads to the next part of the story: how the United States actually carried out the strike and what kind of firepower was used during the operation. When the strike on Kharg Island happened, it wasn't an isolated attack. It was part of a much larger air campaign that has been unfolding across Iran over the past several days. By the time American aircraft reached Kharg Island, the battlefield had already been shaped by earlier operations targeting Iran's radar systems, air defense batteries, and missile launch sites. During the opening phase of the campaign, stealth aircraft such as the F-35 and F-22 were used to dismantle much of Iran's integrated air defense network. Electronic warfare aircraft, like the EA-18G Growler, were also flying missions, jamming radars and communication systems. The goal was simple: open safe corridors through Iranian airspace so heavier strike aircraft could move in. Once those corridors existed, the strike packages became much larger and more aggressive. Bombers and fighter aircraft could now move deeper into Iranian territory and start hitting high-value targets repeatedly. Reports from military analysts suggest the strike likely involved precision-guided weapons designed to hit military facilities without damaging the surrounding oil infrastructure. These kinds of operations typically rely on satellite guidance, drone surveillance, and real-time targeting data coming from reconnaissance aircraft monitoring the battlefield. That information is constantly flowing through a network of surveillance platforms. MQ-9, Predator drones, high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, and even global Hawk systems can scan large areas and transmit coordinates directly to strike aircraft. Instead of searching for targets blindly, pilots receive updated data showing exactly where military assets are located. Once the targeting data is confirmed, strike aircraft can release precision munitions capable of hitting individual buildings or military compounds with extreme accuracy. In many cases, these weapons are guided by GPS or laser systems, allowing them to strike within just a few meters of the intended target. This approach explains why certain parts of Kharg Island were hit while others were left untouched. Military compounds, radar installations, and defensive infrastructure appear to have been the primary focus. The massive oil tanks and loading terminals that dominate the island's coastline were largely avoided. The ability to carry out a strike like this shows how much control the United States has established in the air over the region. Once air defenses weaken, aircraft can conduct repeated operations against specific targets, often returning to strike again after intelligence confirms what damage has already been done. That kind of sustained pressure has been a defining feature of the campaign so far. In the span of just a few days, thousands of targets across Iran have reportedly been struck, ranging from missile launch sites and military bases to logistics hubs supporting the country's defense network. Kharg Island now sits right in the middle of that expanding battlefield, with its military defenses already under attack and its strategic importance making it one of the most closely watched locations in the entire conflict. If the goal had been pure destruction, the oil terminals would have been the easiest targets on the island. They are huge, stationary structures that can be seen clearly from the air and from space. Hitting them would have been simple for modern precision weapons. Instead, the strike focused on removing the protection around the island rather than destroying the economic asset itself. By weakening those defenses first, the situation around Kharg changes dramatically. The island may still be exporting oil for now, but it is far more exposed than it was before the strike. Any future operation against the export terminals themselves would now face far less resistance. From a strategic perspective, that kind of pressure can be more powerful than immediate destruction. It places the facility in a vulnerable position without triggering the massive shock that would come from wiping out the infrastructure in a single attack. That reality changes the balance of the conflict, because Kharg Island is no longer just an oil terminal. It has become one of the most exposed strategic assets in the entire war, and that vulnerability carries serious economic consequences even if the export facilities are still standing for now. Energy markets react not only to destruction, but to risk. The moment a critical export hub enters an active combat zone, insurance costs for tankers begin to rise. Shipping companies start reconsidering routes, and traders begin pricing in the possibility of disruption. Even a partial slowdown at Kharg would ripple through energy markets. Iran relies heavily on oil revenue to fund government spending and maintain economic stability. If shipments begin to slow or tankers start avoiding the area because of security concerns, the financial pressure on Tehran increases very quickly. There is also a psychological effect in global markets. When a major oil terminal sits inside a battlefield, traders begin preparing for worst-case scenarios. Futures prices often move on expectations, not just physical supply. The mere possibility that Kharg could be shut down or heavily damaged in a future strike is enough to introduce volatility into oil markets across Asia and Europe. So even though the storage tanks and export terminals were not destroyed during this operation, the strike still changes the economic picture. The infrastructure that powers Iran's oil exports is now operating under the shadow of continued military pressure, and every new development in the conflict will be watched closely by energy markets around the world. Attention immediately shifts to what Iran might do next. When a country's most sensitive economic asset comes under military pressure, the response is rarely simple. Iran still has several ways it could try to push back, and many of them revolve around the same region where Kharg Island sits. One possibility is retaliation through asymmetric tactics. Iran has long relied on smaller naval units, fast attack boats, drones, and missile strikes to create instability in the Persian Gulf. Even limited attacks against shipping traffic or energy infrastructure in nearby countries could quickly raise tensions across the region. For now, the oil terminals on the island are still operating. Tankers are still loading cargo, but the situation surrounding the island has changed dramatically.